there's a report in the Financial Times this morning which says that this energy strategy is now going to be delayed until April. That's about the 4th of April, we think, maybe, which is a bit of a concern because that will be the third time that it's been delayed. When it was first announced by Boris Johnson in the days after the Russian invasion, it was said that we were going to be getting the strategy within the coming days. Clearly, for the government, it was a huge priority that Britain could show that it had an independent energy supply, that it wasn't reliant on imports of hydrocarbons from the continent and indeed from Russia. But it seems like in the meantime, all of the plans that Number 10 had to try and bring in more energy supply, either through solar, through wind, through nuclear, have, according to this report, been blocked by Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, amid concerns that they're too expensive. So it seems like a Number 10, Number 11 row, 'twas ever thus, is behind all of this. But I mean, for those who are concerned about the UK's energy supply and what's going on in Ukraine, this is pretty worrying.
Certainly worrying, and it's so interesting to look at those dynamics between Number 10 and Number 11, particularly, I suppose, with the financing of nuclear power very expensive, but also when it comes to contentious political issues. We know that a lot of Tory backbenchers are very worried about onshore wind, for example, and indeed there is that row going on and on about British natural shale gas, about fracking. To what extent are these just monetary issues that the Treasury is worried about, or is politics to play too?
No, absolutely. I mean, on both of those issues, on fracking and on wind, a lot of the issue is about whether or not people, the constituents who elect these MPs, are happy to have these energy generation sources around them. And I mean, for fracking, the concern is that it produces seismic activity, sort of earthquakes, essentially, which people are worried about. And there's some evidence that it pollutes water supplies and that sort of thing. With wind, people just don't like them. They think it's ugly. People don't want onshore wind farms on their nice agricultural land because they think it spoils the view. So the problem is that these constituents are then not putting pressure on their MPs. They're under pressure to put Number 10, to do the same to Number 10 and to try and stop these developments. There's actually a really interesting one I wrote about in the Telegraph this morning, an offshore wind development happening in Suffolk. The government's very pro-offshore wind. We're expecting offshore wind to be in the energy strategy. Boris Johnson loves it. But unfortunately, the people who are upset about this offshore farm, who live on the coast, are the constituents of Therese Coffey. And so there's now a row in the cabinet about whether or not it's going to happen. So it seems like, no, you're right, not everyone is rowing in behind Number 10 quite as much as you might have expected, given the situation in Europe.
Fascinating that people can think that their view, which is essentially of nothing, of sea, just looking out, that can somehow be spoilt. I don't quite understand that one, but let's look at what how the Chancellor is received, of course, because his statement didn't go down universally well last week. Is this a man under more pressure than he has been before?
Well, I think so. I mean, he's under pressure from both sides, isn't he? Because on the one hand, you've got Conservative MPs who say that what the Chancellor did on energy is not good enough and that people in this country are still struggling with their energy bills. On the other side, you've got MPs who are saying that the tax burden has gone up from 33% of GDP to 36% of GDP, which means that Rishi can't really be the tax-cutting Chancellor that he promised to be all along. So, I mean, he's under pressure from both ends on this issue. And I think that there are a lot of people who were pretty underwhelmed by what we heard last week. And in fact, there were reports in the Telegraph on Saturday that it was the Chancellor, it was the Chancellor who blocked once again Boris Johnson wanting to do more about energy bills. So there's probably a bit more Number 10, Number 11 shenanigans going on behind the scenes here as well.
Just finally, how does this all play into the local elections? Because, of course, MPs are going back for a sizable break at the end of this week. They'll be talking to their local associations. They'll be talking to their councillors, many of whom are up for election on the 5th of May.
Yes, and we're always expecting that local elections to be difficult for the Conservatives. A lot of the seats that are being elected are in London, which is typically a difficult place for the Tories to hold on to seats, particularly at the midterms. But yeah, I mean, as we know, what happens in local elections often charts what's going on in national politics. Only at Christmas were we talking about how it might be Partygate that affects the result of the local elections. And now it seems like this issue with energy, the price of people's bills, and the general cost of living is going to be the thing that is worrying people on the doorstep.
It's fascinating how quickly the political conversation can turn. Of course, Partygate seems to be a distant memory to many, although, of course, we are still waiting for that police report. Maybe that will turn things again.